So, a warm welcome to my channel. Today, I'm going to start off with this chapter, India and the Contemporary World, Part 1, Social Science, Class 9 textbook. So, in this book, the very first chapter of this book is the French Revolution. The book is divided into three parts, as we can see, and we will do each part, and I will give a short explanation, a very well defined explanation that will consume less time, and we can read more in that. So, let us begin with the chapter The French Revolution. Let us read it like a story that will help us to understand it better. On the morning of 14th July 1789, the city of Paris was in a state of alarm. See, they are not directly telling us the event. As we all know, it is starting with a scene, a city, just like a story is. The king had commanded troops to move into the city. Rumors spread that he would soon order the army to open fire upon the citizens. Some 7,000 men and women gathered in front of the town hall and decided to form a people's militia, which means they are taking law and order conditions into their own hand and starting to protect themselves against the excesses of the government. So, see what they did after forming the militia. Finally, a group of 700 people marched towards part of the city and stormed the fortress prison, the Bastille, where they hoped to hoard ammunition. Ammunitions are the wars and weapons used in a war. In the armed fight that followed, between whom obviously the government and the people, the commander of the Bastille was killed and the prisoners were released. So Bastille was a prison, right? So if it's broken into, the prisoners would be free. Though there were only seven of them, yet the Bastille was hated by all because it stood for the despotic power of the king. So the Bastille was the symbol of the authoritarian, and just like authoritarian, which means totalitarian, just like Hitler did in Germany, like that, the despotic power means the king is not accountable to the people. The fortress was demolished and its stone fragments were sold in the markets to all who wished to keep a souvenir of its destruction. So you see, a historical event is going on, and the stones with which this building was built was totally destroyed, and the fragments of the buildings, the precious stone which they were made, ancient buildings had many good qualities in them, so they were sold in the market as a memory of this destruction. The days that followed saw more rioting both in Paris and the countryside. Most people were protesting against the high price of bread. Now bread was a essential commodity in those days. Just like in India, we have rice and dal in the essential food grain of our country, and if its price increases at a very unregulated rate, then people will become angry. There is reason for the anger. Much later, when historians look back upon this time, they saw it the beginning of the chain of events that led to the destruction of the king in France. Though most people at the same time did not anticipate its outcome, how and why did it happen? So here's we have been given a short description of the position of Paris after this attack, and you can see in this picture the storming of the Bastille. Okay, and people are commemorating this event as if the king has fallen and the power of the people had risen. Now, see, let us go to a background of the society and the causes, reasons behind the French Revolution. French society during the late 18th century. Now, first of all, I would like to show that this chart is very important. It shows a society of estates, divisions in the society on the base of economic power. First estate consisted of the clergy. Second estate, nobility. Nobility means people who are close to the king. Third estate is big businessmen, and the third estate had parts of itself. See, it is again divided into three groups of people: big businessmen, merchants, lawyers, officials. They are third is part of the third estate, but they have more economic power than the second and the third positions in this third estate. Next is the peasants and the artisans, and then we have landless labor and servants. So it depends upon the economic power and the work on which this society was divided. In 1774, now this is about the French society. I have told you this society of estates was a feature of the French society during the late 18th century. Keeping in that in mind, let's proceed. In 1774, Louis XVI of the Bourbon family of kings ascended the throne of France. So there was dynastic rule, and of this family which ruled the French society for years and dynasties, this person ascended the throne. He was 20 years old and married to the Austrian prince Marie Antoinette. Upon his accession, the new king found an empty treasury. Long years of war had drained the resources of France. In previous times, there used to be many wars, and it was an economic drain on the country's resources. Added to this was the cost of maintaining an extravagant court at the expense of the place of Versailles. Under Louis XVI, France helped the 13 American colonies gain their independence from the common enemy Britain. The war added more than a billion livres to a debt that had already risen to more than 2 billion livres. Let us see, this is a unit of currency in France which was later discontinued in 1794. So, spending money on other countries' freedom for other countries' sake, so this all cost money in economic terms. You're giving moral support as well as financial support as well as the war support to the people to gain independence. So lenders who gave the state credit now began to charge 10% loan interest on loans. So the French government was obliged to spend an increasing percentage of its budgets to meet the interest payments. Okay, not only to return the loan but also pay the interests to meet its regular expenses such as the cost of maintaining an army, running government offices, universities. State was forced to increase the taxes because these are the government expenditures which the government need to income. Yet even this measure of what, increasing the taxes, putting burden on the people, yet even this measure would not have been sufficient, okay, for this uh, extravagant expenditure of the government. French society in the 18th century was divided into three estates, and only members of the third estate paid taxes. Although this is the estate which has the lower income than the clergy and the nobility, but they had to pay more taxes. This third estate consists of more people than if you count the first and the second estate. So in people in general, the poor people or the lower income groups, middle income groups, they were taking the burden of the taxes of the government. The society of estates was passed of the feudal system that dated back to the Middle Ages. So, from the Middle Ages till they had continued this custom of the estates, that who would pay the money, who would be taxed, who would not be, and how the society would be divided. The term old regime is used to describe the institutions and society of France before 1789. Now we have seen the chart regarding the estates, and see, however, only a small peasants made up 90% of the population. As I told, the percent of population of the poor people was more, and only a small number of them owned a land. So mostly they were croppers, and who was their landowner? They were the nobles, the church, and richer members of the third estate. The members of the two estates, that is, the clergy and the nobility, were the less in number, enjoyed many privileges by birth, by being birthed in a family with whose main occupation is clergy. So this was this privilege they enjoyed because of birth. This was an discrimination, and people were suffering from it. The most important was the exemption from paying taxes to the state. They started enjoying feudal privileges. This included feudal dues, which they extracted from the peasants. So, on the money of the poor peasants, they were just putting their extravagant expenditure and they were enjoying. Peasants were obliged to render services to work in. So, this were the terrible conditions in which they had to live and had to work. What was their work? They had to work in the houses of this rich people and the fields of this who belonged to this rich people, to serve in the army, building roads, and all those works. The church had its own share of taxes like tithes from the peasants, and all members had of the third estate. Now here again and again the thing is, the third estate had to pay the taxes, whether it's to the state or for the church. So you can see the burden of the taxes fell on whom? The third estate. This included a direct tax from the state, this is tally, and the number of indirect taxes on everyday consumption, basic consumptions like salt, tobacco. The burden was borne by the third estate. So we can see from the system of this estates and who would pay the taxes, we can know. Now, if we see the term tally, we have already defined it. And let us go next. Now, if we see this amazing painting, it depicts a lock. It shows that the nobleman is the spider and the peasant is the fly, which means if we compare the spider to the fly, if the spider always dupes the fly into its capture and kills it. Okay, so it shows the position of the people of the third estate and the position of the people from the noble estate, or the first or the second estate. Now, second cause was the struggle to survive. Population was increasing, and this led to a greater demand for food grains to keep up with this population. Production of food grains was not so much, and as I told you, the price of bread was, and the bread was the staple diet of the people, and the price of the common bread was increasing. Most people, most of the poor population, to be very specific, were employed as laborers in workshops, but the wages did not keep pace with their prices. The gap between the poor and the rich widened because the poor had a much greater problem in buying those costly food grains than a rich man does, because they were the ones paying taxes, they were the ones working hard, and they were the ones, they were on the verge of a crisis. This became worse when there was any climatic natural calamity, which led to, that was frequent in France during the old regime. Okay, subsistence crisis refers to the extreme situation in which the basic livelihood is endangered. So you can imagine how the dangerous the condition became. Okay, and growing middle class envisages an end to privileges. Envisages means visions. You can see here how a subsistence crisis works. Supposedly, there is a bad harvest and there is a epidemic, and the poorest can no longer buy the bread because the money the poor have, the burden that the poor had to take to suffice their meal or their hunger, the same money the rich had to pay, but the income of the rich was huge and the income of the poor was very less to meet up the demand, so they were almost starving. A growing middle class. So if we see the middle class that was growing, let us see. uh, in the past, peasants and workers had participated in revolts against increasing taxes and food scarcity. but they lacked the means to carry the full scale measures that would bring change in the social and economic order. So, to carry out the full scale measures that would uh, create a successful change, and people within the third estate became the few ones who hardly became rich sometimes, and they had access to education and new ideas. You remember that education is the greatest weapon anybody can have. It can lead to revolutions, transformations, and it can change the whole mindset and change and lead to a fall of a kingdom. It's so strong and powerful. The 18th century witnessed the emergence of social groups termed the middle class. This middle class, from where did it come? How did it derive their income? Let us know. They earned their wealth through an expanding overseas trade, means trade across countries. From the manufacture of goods like woolen, silk material, woolen textiles, these were brought by the richer members of the society. So they were also lawyers, administrative officials, they were the educated ones. Okay, and they believed, as they were hardworking, educated, and in professions in such official positions, they believed that no group in the society should be privileged by birth. In today's society, if we see, the people, we are continuous, all of us are continuously striving towards excellence, working, and if we see a person who is just privileged because of his birth and this thing, we will certainly get angry, and we will think this is a bad type of discrimination based on wealth. We should not do this. People who have more economic power, more advantageous position, it should not be like that. So they had this idea, but the rich people did not care, really did not care. So they tried to maintain the system, while the middle class which emerged tried to break it. These ideas of a society based on freedom, equal laws, and equal opportunities. These were the mm, philosophies uh, put forward by John Locke, Rousseau, and in two treaties of the government. This is given an example. As they become educated, they went through these ideas. So there was a total change in their thinking and the emergence of a new class which visioned a free society. So, in the two treaties of the government, Locke sought to refute the doctrine of absolute right of the monarch, and he questioned the monarch, and he just refused to believe that anything called monarch exists and anything called God's own son or a person, the sender of God, exist. Rousseau carried forward the idea, and it showed that the government should be formed for the people, by the people, and based on the people. He This is a political science term. Social contract theory is there of Rousseau, Locke. So we will read when we do the political science part. So, in the spirit of laws, Montesquieu proposed a division of power between the, even to go far with these ideas. This were written many years old, and when people were introduced it, they absolutely fell in love with these ideas, especially the middle class, growing educated people. And they, what did Montesquieu say? That there should be a division of power. Not only that the government should be made based on people's opinion, but the government should be divided into legislature, executive, and judiciary. Model of this government was put forth in USA after the 13 colonies declared independence from Britain. America's constitution was an important example of the political thinkers of France. So they thought that when America, USA, a country like that who has got independence, newly independent, following the freedom and all those new ideas are based, and the constitution is totally based on those, why not ours? Okay, so they started questioning. The ideas of the philosophers were discussed in saloons, coffee houses, among the general people. It's not like a few educated thinkers were sitting in a place and in the huge homes or in the huge houses telling. They made it so clear that the general people could understand their terms. They need to reach the lowermost strata, ignite them for the revolution. The mm, They were frequently read aloud in groups for the benefit for those who could not read and write. So it was made accessible to those, and this is very dangerous for the king and his kingdom. The news that Louis XVI planned to impose further taxes, this generated anger against the system of privileges, like that more taxes, who will bear the burden? That's the third estate, no one but the third estate. So they were literally angry as they know the truth now. Okay, and let us go. This was also a reason of the spread of education. Now see, let us see the outbreak of the revolution. Okay, the base has been ready, and we are almost set to go set the revolution on fire. Louis XVI had to increase taxes. Okay, we have learned the reasons. In France of the old regime, the monarch did not have the power to impose taxes according to his own will. Rather, he had to call a meeting. This is the system they're talking about. How to impose the taxes? Was it alone a wish of the old of the monarch, or he had to talk with whom? The Estates General, and they would ask for a proposal of new taxes. The Estates General was a political body where the three estates, people, representatives of the three form of indirect democracy, and would send their representatives for the taking the important political decision. However, the monarch alone could decide when to call a meeting. The last time it was on 1614. So the year is now 18th century. It was not there anymore. On uh, 5th May 1789, Louis XVI called together an assembly of the Estates General to pass proposals for the new taxes. Versailles was the place where they were going to have the meeting. So the total number of delegates in this meeting is very important. Remember, it's 1789 meeting. Remember, it's very important meeting. In this meeting, 600 members came. The third estate was now represented by not the uneducated people or people who could be imposed, whom the first estate or the king can impose his ideas and brainwash them, but it was the prosperous and educated members. Peasants, artisans were denied entry. However, their grievances was listed in those letters the representatives had brought with them. Voting in the past had been conducted according to the principle that each state had one vote. This time Louis stood determined to continue the same practice. But members of the third estate demanded that voting now be conducted by the assembly as a whole, where each member would have one vote. This was one of the democratic principles of Rousseau. Okay, and if they vote according to estate, then the first and the second estate they don't pay taxes. They will obviously say yes to more taxes on the third estate. Why would they try to not to benefit from the third estate? They would try to socially control them. But the third estate now was very, as I told you, educated. Awareness was there, so their ideas were different, and this time they are not gonna be fooled. When the king rejected this proposal, members of the third estate walked out of the assembly. So the king rejected. He told this was our custom, and he had fears in mind that this could, if we give and the majority of the people belong to the third estate, if we give vote even to the representatives, they were sure to lose. The king was always on the side, and always on his benefit, on the side of the richer men in the society. The representatives of the third estate viewed themselves as a spokesman of the whole French nation. Why not? Because majority of the population belong to the third estate and the middle class that has grown. So they were believing they were logically correct. On 20th June, they assembled in the hall of an indoor tennis court in the grounds of Versailles. They declared themselves a national assembly and swore not to disperse until they had drafted a constitution to France that would limit the powers of the monarch. So they were taking a very bold decision of forming a national assembly representing forming constitution and limiting the powers of the monarch. That was sure to lead to chaos. There were Mirabeau, I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right. Mirabeau was born in a noble family, was convinced of the need to do away with the society of feudal privilege. He brought out a journal, delivered powerful speeches at the assembly to say that how discriminate the system was to most of the people in France. So it ignited them. He brought out a journal, okay, and another person, Abbe, was oppressed. He called the pamphlet. He wrote the pamphlet called "What is the Third Estate?" So he wrote about the problems and other things. They just ignited the whole population. While the National Assembly was busy at Versailles drafting a constitution, the rest of the France ceded into turmoil. A severe again, the natural calamity, the price of the commonest of the common thing, bread, which the people eat in the as a staple food, rose. Bakeries exploited this situation, hoarded supplies, created a deficiency, and charged higher prices. So people, traders, and all those people, they were benefiting in their own way from the common people. After spending hours in long queues at bakery, the crowds of angry women stormed into the shops. And what did the king do to make the law and order situation? They called in troops, and the agitated crowd destroyed the Bastille. So this was the event that is beautifully described here. And the first we were reading us like a story, and this story had started here, and now from here it will continue from the first. So now you can get the link. In the countryside, rumors spread village to village that the lords of manor, who is manor? It is an estate consisting of the landlord's lands and his mansion. Especially the clergyman and all those people were the landlords. Caught in a frenzy of fear, peasants in several districts seized pitchforks, and all those these things are used for agriculture, and attack the Tutex. Tutex is the castle of the noble people, and they hoarded grain, burned down the documents containing all the reference to that this estates was theirs, and there was due of this sharecropper, this farmer, this small landowner had taken such loan. All things were burned down, and a large number of nobles fled from their homes. Many migrate to neighboring countries, so they need to save themselves. Faced with the power of his revolting subjects, the king was so much in turmoil, seeing the whole country in turmoil. He accepted that yes, there would be a national assembly, and he also accepted that his powers will be checked on from the constitution. So on the night of auspicious night, rather I would say, of 4th August 1789, the assembly passed a decree abolishing the feudal system of obligation and taxes. Now the whole system of privileges was forced to be shut down and removed from ever. The existence did not exist, and land owned by the church and all other taxes of people's money, they were seized, confiscated. The government had acquired assets worth billions, and what the government did was to divide the assets among the people as they wanted use of the assets as per the National Assembly. Now, France, in this way, there is a transition, and France becomes a constitutional monarchy, where the monarchy is just a constitutional head. He's just a head, a nominal head, just like the president in India. No, and he doesn't participate anywhere. The monarch in the meetings, and there is also prime minister. So it's the powers of no decision is taken by the monarch. Is just a nominal head. Okay, this is the definition according to political science. Now, the National Assembly completed the draft of the Constitution as they had said the things are going correct. Its main object was to limit the powers of the monarch. It was this division that was talked about was also done between the legislature, executive, and judiciary, and this made France a constitutional monarchy. Now let us see how the constitution worked. This constitution worked in this manner that there was judiciary, executive, and legislature. First, legislature. Let us go to legislature. Now, see, passive citizens, no voting rights. About 3 million men, women, and youth below 25 were not allowed to vote. Active citizens, which included 28 million people, and see that women are not given right till now. Till now means till 1791, and this 28 million active citizens voted, and the electors were 50,000 men. Again, they voted in the National Assembly. So, total there was 745 members. Okay. Now, the legislature controlled the ministers and controlled the king as well. The king could pass on a veto. Okay. And the judge was also elected by voting of the people. Okay. Judge was also elected by voting of the people. This was the political system of the Constitution of 1791. Okay, and see, these are the few points. Not all citizens had the right to vote, as I've told you. To qualify as an elector, a man had to become the highest bracket of taxpayers. Till now, there were restrictions that you have to be a highest taxpayer in the tax slab. The Constitution began with the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizens, and such as the right to freedom of speech, freedom of opinion, and these were also natural and inalienable rights, like just like the human rights belong to each human, inherent in their birth. Okay, so now in this manner, the Constitution was framed. The Declaration of Man and Citizen. This is a part of the article they have framed inside their constitution. See, there are 17, 17 parts. Men are born and remain free and equal in rights. The aim of every political association is the preservation of the natural and inalienable rights of the man. These are the right to property, security, resistance to oppression, the source of all sovereignty, resides in the nation and not a group of people or that used to be existing when the monarch was in power. The liberty consists of the power to do whatever but not what is injurious to others. You are enjoying freedom, that doesn't mean your freedom can take away other people's freedom. The law has the right to forbid only action that are injurious to society. So, what is law? Law is the expression of the general will of the people. General will means the candidates they want to choose, and they will make the laws, because in legislature they are choosing the people. So, they if they don't choose a person to this electors national assembly, he will not get elected. So, if the person says this is the law I will make if I come to power, so they will choose that person, and whichever law, whichever thing suits them. Okay, there are 28 million, and each vote will matter then. No man can be accused, arrested, except in cases determined by the law. So everything had to be according to law, judiciary, and constitution. Every citizen must take responsibility for the abuse of such liberty, like they must be accountable. As the government is accountable to the people should be accountable to the law. Okay, for the maintenance of public force and for the expenses of the administration, a common taxation, the payment of tax to the government for developmental purposes was necessary. Now, regarding property, what they have told regarding, I have told you regarding the taxes. So now the property comes. Mm, Property is sacred, inviolable, and it is, if a person property is taken, he must be given adequate compensation. Let us read the political symbols that were used at the time when people were not so much educated to read and write. The broken chain, which symbolized freedom, becoming free. The bundle of rods, which symbolized strength, lies in unity. The I within the triangle is I stands for knowledge and to drive away the clouds of ignorance, like just like the clouds of a rainy day can be driven away by the sun, just like that. Spectre means the symbol of royal power, and a snake biting its tail to form a ring means a ring has neither beginning nor end. And this red pyrene cap worn by a slave upon becoming free, this blue, white, red, the national colors of France, the winged woman, the personification of law. The law tablet is same and equal for all. Next is the France abolishes monarchy and becomes a republic. So after the framing of the constitution, this is France becoming republic.